You're tuned in to the Data Masters podcast. In each episode, we dissect the complexities of data management and discuss the data strategies that fuel innovation, growth, and efficiency. We speak with industry leaders who share how their modern approaches to data management help their organizations succeed. Let's dive straight into today's episode with Anthony Dayton.
Welcome to the Data Masters podcast. Today, we're joined by J.C. Lionti, the Chief Data Officer for Mizuho Americas. The role of the Chief Data Officer in banking has evolved far beyond just managing data. It's really about turning data into a strategic asset. From navigating intense regulations to driving innovation and preparing for an AI-powered future, the CDO sits at the center of the action. And JC has been at the forefront of this evolution. And he's here to share his insights. So, JC, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Anthony. Very happy to be here.
So I thought we could start with kind of a big picture view of the role of the Chief Data Officer, and in particular in the context of the financial services industry. As I need not tell you, the industry is under intense regulatory pressure and lots of growth opportunities. And that sort of presents you, I think, as a Chief Data Officer with a challenge of balancing the defensive game of compliance and regulation and risk management with the offensive game of using data to drive innovation and business growth. I'm curious from your perspective how you think about balancing these competing pressures.
Yeah, balancing is probably the right term. You refer to offense and defense. So I'm a soccer fan. So I see, in fact, the CDO as a midfield, or we try to go back to a football analogy, probably a quarterback. So we're really, I would say, having to pivot between offense and defense constantly. And say we have different phases of plays where some of them are much more defense intensive, and you're right, in financial services, we are heavily regulated. That's not going to change. That's not going to go away, and there's a reason for that. But at the same time, we have to support our businesses, and I believe we not just in financial services, but now it's becoming even more true in financial services, where the speed of evolution, speed to market, new product, new ideas, how to serve your client, and just the general reactivity that the market expect from everyone today makes it mandatory to use data to improve your operations, to improve your decision-making processes. And so it's in my opinion, it's no longer a statement in the CDO role. Those two, offense and defense role, have to exist at the same time. It's very difficult to be very effective, for example, in managing offense if you cannot rely anyway on the foundation that are needed, for example, to have a sound defense practice. So all of that in my opinion, comes well together under the CDO mandate, sorry.
Yeah. So a good example of this, in my opinion, is this idea of the single 360-degree view of the customer, which I know is a big goal of many banks. And the reason I love this example is that I think it speaks, and you're welcome to agree or disagree, but I think it speaks to both opportunities. On the one hand, a 360 view of the customer allows you to significantly improve the service offering that you give that customer. And secondarily, it's a key requirement regulatorily around KYC and understanding the risk profile that customer represents. So I guess the first question is, do you agree? And then the second is, what are some of the organizational and technical hurdles that get in the way of creating that 360 view of the customer?
Now, first of all, I agree. I mean, it's fundamental. In fact, in my opinion, if there's one thing that a CDO should start to care for is that precisely. To your point, it's extremely mandatory if you want to push and if you want to get your business to the next level of development. Okay, I think every business can grow without that, in my opinion, but there's going to come a point where, the size of the organization is going to be such that, not understanding what you do with your customer, the product that you sell them, the product that you could sell them, is going to become a real hurdle to further development. So that's key. Then you mentioned risk management. Obviously, meaning the regulators in 2008 through BCBS 239 have kind of made it mandatory. So we need to understand where our risks are, with whom, and so on. So the BCBS 239 does not explicitly requires a customer 360 or a customer master, but if you don't have it, the exercise becomes much more complicated. Compliance or complying with different regulation is another element, but this one even crosses back to business development. So today, for example, you could sell different type of product to the same client. The level of requirements or due diligence that you need to do will be different depending on those products. Okay, commodities, for example, versus pure market versus Federal Reserve Bank, they have different requirements. So you have a lot of different elements to be able to, or I would say, aspect of compliance that you need to be able to check, and understanding what you do and what you can do for a client already, meaning as a value if you want to accelerate again delivery of additional services. I think I'm taking the fact that what you have to do before serving your client as a given, but bringing it together and accelerating, therefore optimize your compliance processes and accelerating how you can get your client ready to be served. It's very important. So that's a critical element on that we started to tackle. In fact, 18 months, 2 years ago. That was 2 years ago. In fact, that was one of my first strategic push and change when I joined Mizuho.
Yeah, which I think speaks to why how important it is. Like you join Mizuho, and the first things you tackle is this single view of the customer. I was asking a little bit about the technical and organizational challenges. Let me throw an idea at you, get your reaction. I have this perspective that data reflects the organization that creates it. So if a bank is organized geographically, then you end up with geographic silos. If you organize the bank by product, checking versus investment accounts, you end up with silos by a product silo. And of course, you could do both, and there's no reason you can't have many silos. I'm curious if you would agree with that this idea of the silos of data is really an inhibitor, and secondarily, that it's a function of how not just banks, but any business is organized.
I agree. And I think the silo problem is usually the number one problem of a CDO. Okay, in any organization, meaning organizational construct, as you mentioned, have dictated for ages how decisions were made, and therefore how data was organized to enable those decision-making processes. So now, when you want to shift them or you want to elevate them, you have to fight those silos. Okay, and the key for me is not to kill the silos. It's not to remove the silos. It's just to make sure that now silos are not completely tight and waterproof one to another. It's meaning how you connect the silos, how you make the silos interact with one another, communicate with one another, share with one another. That's very important. Okay. Specifically, meaning financial services, banks have been around for a long time. Most, if not all of them, have gone or have grown through mergers or business combinations. So all of that creates also the weight of legacy. Okay, so and that's something that we cannot ignore, and we cannot wait to have solved it to resolve some of our business problems. So it's a challenge, but I think it's also ingrained in how, again, organization operates, and that's something that, in my opinion, we have to accept and understand how to deal with rather than trying to fight, because it's very difficult.
This reminds me of this, I think, widely discredited view that, which admittedly comes from a long time ago, that the future was everything was going to be in one database, data warehouse, data mart, whatever the thing of the or system of record. This kind of beautiful vision that I think, and in some cases, software companies would sell, which is this idea that, well, if you just got all of your data in X, then all of your silos would be solved. And I think what you're pointing out is, no, actually, there's a reason that we've organized the business in this way, by geography or by product or by whatever the construct that matters. And that creates some benefits to the organization, and the data strategy needs to accommodate that, not not force a replacement of that.
That's correct. No, that's correct. I think it's also a question of, or function rather, of how quickly do you want to deliver value to your business. There is a disconnect. There's always been, and it becomes, and then the gap becomes even wider and wider as we go, between the time it takes to change those large systems. Remember, in financial services, a lot of legacy platform is still on cloud, some on premises or not in cloud, or even running on mainframe to some extent. So changing or moving away from that takes a long time. Okay, the business cannot wait. So I think we have collectively understood that warehouses are great. They're not the solution. They're a component of a solution. They're not the end. Okay, and the same way today, we've seen the pace at which technology evolves. So the technology decision today, I remember when I started my career, was still in 10-year plans, and we were investing. I remember discussing when I was in the CFO offices, why can we amortize cost of software over 10 years, because that's how long we're going to keep them. That's gone. Today technology moves so fast that replacement usually will come much ahead of this type of period. Data stays. The data that you accumulated in your business 10 years ago and the one that you accumulated today will stay. So how are you articulating now your solutions, and how are you articulating your strategy to recognize this and get the data out, make it available for consumption, and create the value that your business needs?
So I totally agree. And let me sort of bring these two ideas together in the context of a sort of data foundation. So I think what I hear you saying is you need to lay a strong foundation underneath any data strategy. And I'm curious, from your experience and perspective, what does this foundational data layer, if you want to call it that, what does this data foundation look like? And also, maybe for listeners who are earlier on the journey than you are, what's the first most critical step in building out this foundational data layer?
Let me answer your last question first. your foundation has to be built to serve a purpose, a business purpose. So the first step is to understand again what your business needs, and what therefore how you want to help them achieving or fulfilling that need. So it's very important to do this. Otherwise, you will put probably a generic solution ahead of a very specific problem, and that you run a higher probability for the two not to meet at the end. So you maybe it's something that was not going to be fit for purpose. So the fit for purpose is very critical. There are different ways to then achieving that purpose. But I think one of the key concept in that data foundation or that data pipelines is to recognize, and something that goes against one of the first rule that I've heard when I started evolving in the data circle, which is the data has to be pristine at the source.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're online. I cannot use certain words, but that's BS. You need to create a set of a pipeline in the data process to create a foundation that allows for cleansing. Why? Because you could have data is created for a business process initially and by a business process, which could be slightly different from some of the purposes or the consumption of that data. So you need to allow for that adjustment. Second, even if you have very good pipeline, it can be proved difficult or impossible. Therefore, to have data corrected at the source, rerunning a certain number of processes to be able to get your clean data at the end. So, if just for that, not just that, you have to allow a time constrained cleansing process so that, again, your consumer can have the data it needs when he needs it. Okay. But a couple of elements when we talk about creating that foundation, it's really, again, understanding how you go from your raw data, from your system of record to, I will say, data sets. So how do you organize them in a logical manner? Could be by product, could be, but meaning still like general purpose. And how then do you move them to your final consumption product? Well, we're here, they're much more curated. You can combine different data sets together and so on to fulfill, again, your consumer objective. So it's really how do you articulate and architect those three layers? How do you move data the least amount of time? I'm big upon that. It's the time where we had to copy everything and anything. As many versions as you have customer, in my opinion, it's gone. It shouldn't exist. So that foundation has to be rigorous with a progressive level of curation and an equal level of governance. So that doesn't mean that you should let your source system do whatever they want, the way they want it, but I would say you have to give them. They're here to support their own purposes, so you have to let them do that and do that well and as well as they can. And then making sure that when it comes to breaking silos, for example, that every time you create those final product ready, consumable or consumer ready assets, that those are exposed so people know what they are and they can see them as they could discover any product on, for example, on an Amazon marketplace, understand what's in there, understand the level of qualification or certification, so that you can, again, reuse those products as much as possible. Okay, so governance, velocity and agility are very important. And the last, we talk about governance, a very strong component that we're pushing right now within Mizuho is to, again, function along and being organized along business data domains. Okay, and make sure that ownership, accountability, and understanding of the data is done and is really the day-to-day reality from people who are using that data. We know that talk about data quality. For data to be of good quality, it needs to be used. If it's not used, it decays very quickly and it rapidly becomes obsolete and irrelevant. So we're really pushing this and trying to align the technology organization gradually, again, to follow and fold under these type of organization.
I think there's a couple or really important ideas there. And to go back to where you started, this idea of connecting the work that you're doing, the data work that you're doing, to a business strategy. I can't tell you how many data pipelines. It's like a data pipeline to nowhere. Someone's built something, it's moving
Yes.
data around, and someone's like, "Well, why did we do that?" Well, I don't know. We've always moved it there. Okay, but is anyone actually using that data? So I think this is arguably, if a listener took nothing else from this conversation, just to begin every data project with a conversation about business strategy and how this aligns, would be key. But the thing I think that you talked about that is maybe a little unexpected is there is a tendency for most data practitioners to think about the raw data, to think from the data up and not from the business problem back. And you have this wonderful story you tell about being surprised when you got access to data that you thought was raw data but wasn't. And maybe share that, because I think it's very instructive to see how the good intentions of an IT organization can often get in the way of trying to get a good data strategy in place.
And I think that also come the crossroad of managing legacy practices and processes into I would say a newer approach. But today, the concept of cleansing has been existing for quite a long time. Okay, some companies didn't listen to that earlier, I would say, guiding principle of data governance, that your source data had to be perfect. And I think you have technology organization who've tried to solve certain problems and for consumers already, and have therefore we're aware of some of those problems and try to solve them. Sometimes well, sometimes not as well, but the intention was there. And when you rebuild a new strategy that goes from, I really need to have the true view as to what the system of record produces, because if I want to ask folks nonetheless to correct, we need to have that uninterrupted and a very pure audit trail. And yes, I had a project where some of our IT colleagues that were helping us moving on that project thought they were very well intentioned and say, "Oh, we know the problems that our data colleagues are going to be encountering, so we're going to give them already, I will say, pre-washed data." And I think the intention was fantastic. The results were not as good. As we started to unwind this and discover this, it became impossible then to go back to the source system folks and say, "Guys, we need you to change this." They didn't recognize that data anymore. So that did cost us certain number of weeks of delay in our project to bring it back the way it should. And that illustrates, in fact, one of the principles that I try to enforce as often as possible, which is you should not consume data from anything that's not either gold or silver, meaning the source or one step away from the source and untouched. So that's very important. We have to reduce the point of failure. We have to reduce the number of friction in our data pipelines, and that's a great, I would say, lesson to, again, yes, there could be assets out there, but before using them, you really have to make sure that they are what you need, and not jumping in the unknown. So close to the source as much as possible. Understand your transformation if you want to have effective pipelines.
Yeah. No, again, I think it's a great lesson for people to take away from this conversation. Really always thinking, and I think that's exactly right, like one step away from source at worst or best, but source at best. Shifting gears a little bit, thinking about business value, I wonder if you could share a specific example in your experience of where getting your hands on clean, trusted data has helped translate into some business value, whether it was cost efficiency, better decision making, superior customers' experiences. Is there a practical example you can share?
Yes, I think I'm going to use one here, which is more around costs. I would say cost savings or cost optimization, and relates to really the procurement and expense management. So it was a simple case of having different areas of the business not be able to really understand a level of detail, really what they were purchasing from where, how was that translating in their P&L. There was a fragmentation of vendor landscape, fragmentation of service landscape, and we've been asked to try to crack the code and help them connect procurement, contract management, expense management all together when those three processes had some level of connection, but were widely independent, managed by different teams in different business units and so on. And I think people came to us after having exhausted what was then the traditional approach to solving a problem, where, so again, going to understand, okay, what system are used today in those processes? Yes, we do not know. We do not have the link between the contract and the expense, and then we're missing also a link between the expense and the SOW that defines the services. And so, okay. Purchasing team, how long would it take to bring those data points in all systems? Years. So the procurement group came to us in those where we cannot do it. We need something faster. And this is where I think, again, we started to put together a project with them that, in fact, was aimed to develop a new data product for them that was bringing those data sets together, understand how the data sets were related, how we could create those keys and connection between the data, and from there start to develop a lot of tools, decision-making tools that allow them to, again, better anticipate contract renewals, understand overlap of services, and for the business to also understand, meaning at the end, with a much better granularity, what they were spending and how. So, and clearly, I think what was the reason why it was tangible business value is that once we went through, so the POC was successful, and I think the first MVP was delivered in 3 months. Okay, and from there, after the first MVP, once the procurement organization understood what they could do with it, we needed to invest more to turn the MVP into now a real product, which would evolve and so on. And they committed a significant 7-figure annual savings, which meaning allowed the funding of the final product to be unlocked with still a very positive P&L impact.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you see in that example is certainly not starting with thinking about a data foundation, but starting with what's the question we're trying to answer, And then I think another big idea there is starting with a solution that's not perfect, but get started. And that creates the confidence to then fund the bigger idea, which is let's go get it one more turn of the crank, one more iteration better.
Yeah, and then the architecture and the more, I would say, sustainable, longer term architecture solution behind it was built.
Yeah, and then it becomes obvious that we need to do that in a more systematized way because the value's been realized. I feel like we can't have any conversation today without talking about AI, and I'm confident every bank is, and Mizuho not accepted, is super eager to think about how to deploy AI in all kinds of different use cases. But I'm curious on your perspective as a chief data officer about how you help make the bank AI ready. How do you think about a data foundation as a driver in these AI strategies? Or maybe I'm wrong, and maybe AI strategies have nothing to do with data and not something you're even thinking about, but probably not. So give me your perspective on data and AI.
No, I think, of course, I would say that all banks are thinking AI or started AI. I think I know of a few that are still lagging. They're still lagging behind, but data and AI goes together. Absolutely. I've heard, when AI started to really become a big thing, like 3 years ago, there was a lot of skepticism from the CDO community. Say, how can you do AI if you don't have good data?
Mm.
Okay, which is not untrue at all. But I think for a lot, and it became like, okay, let's wait to have good data and then we'll start doing AI. That's the same thing as the point we discussed a little bit earlier, trying to fix your technology before starting to think about, I will say, creating new processes and bring value to your business. You cannot wait. You have to accelerate, but you have to be prudent and you have to understand in what you can and what you cannot do. So as far as we're concerned, we definitely have invested quite a bit in AI. Okay. I know some banks are, I would say, labeling themselves as AI first. Okay. Not most banks are not. Okay. On our side, I would like to believe that, or I will characterize us as AI smart. We need AI. It's impossible not to use AI today. AI is everywhere, in vendor solutions, in vendor software, in your email, in your phone. You have AI everywhere. So how can we get ready to leverage as much as we can, wherever it makes sense, and again, to fulfill business value? Everything, the way we're approaching it is, yes, there are a certain number of maybe core investment that needs to be made without an explicit ROI. And when you think about AI, the ROI could be explained or expressed in different manners. But we're really looking at the business finality into everything we do. And in fact, we brought together AI and analytics as a like solutioning unit where business come to us now with a problem or pain points or an objective they want to achieve and say, hey, help us. And the solution could take different forms. It could take, yes, there's some data engineering, so plain old analytics. In most cases, yes, you have an AI component that comes in. Guess what? At the end, it goes back to your good old architecture, storing your output somewhere and making it available to another processes and so on. So that's the way we're approaching it. Okay, first we want to make sure that we give tools to make everyone more productive. So think about all the Microsoft, for example, suite and how you use Copilot and all the productivity gains it can bring. You can think about programming, coding assistants or solutions with with GitHub Copilot or all the type of solution. You could think about accelerating research or making research or search much more intelligent, okay, by combining it again with now the interactivity of generative AI and large language models. But also, meaning we also make sure that we are supporting the business to deploy safely new solutions that have AI embedded. Okay, vendors that come and help, partners that can come and help us, meaning have their own solutions. We need to evaluate whether it's safe to use them, making sure that we're very comfortable with the output and the processes and so on. And I think lastly, if we think about architecture, that was part of your question, what we're informing, and we're trying to stay a little bit ahead of the cycle when it comes to thinking about creating new pipelines or new processes within our infrastructure and architecture to enable further use of AI. But one of the approach that we've taken is AI is everywhere. So if you want good data to fuel some of your AI, I would say centric processes, we're also using AI to improve the quality of that data.
Mm.
Okay, and it's working right now, meaning pretty well. We have probably close to say 2 dozens of solutions today in production, and I think our number of unsuccessful POCs have been very low, extremely low. And the demand is growing again because we try to stay very close to the business needs and answering their requirements pretty quickly. So changing how we deliver is also a big component of our AI strategy.
So relying on AI as part of the delivery mechanism, not just as an input.
Both, and also how do you change your approach and your method to delivery? So the standard waterfall LDLC, for example, does not work to show incremental value, meaning regularly. You have to move to something which is much more aligned with agile principle or the design thinking method to be able to realize and execute and deploy solutions, including AI solutions, rapidly.
So just to wrap us up, I thought I would shift gears completely and take advantage of you as a successful chief data officer and leader. I imagine many of the listeners to this podcast themselves are not yet chief data officers, but are aspiring chief data officers that would hope as part of their career trajectory that they would end up there. I'm curious, from your perspective, what advice you would give to an aspiring chief data officer of the future. What's one thing they should be doing today to put them on the right path to be the CDO of tomorrow?
If there was one piece of advice I would give is to, again, stay very close to the business. Managing data is a output to input process, not the other way around. So one thing that is difficult to do, if not impossible to do, is to govern and manage the entire data estate of a company. Very difficult. It's too big and so on. Usually when it comes to the type of scope, the only thing you're trying to do is make sure it's tight and nothing goes out. You don't want to go out, goes out. But when it comes to extracting value, you cannot curate the entire estate. So you have to put your investments where they matters. And that could take, again, financial services. A lot of us have started or have to dedicate significant amount of resources to regulatory requirement and regulatory compliance. And that's fine. That's a value. Don't forget about it. So that's one thing. And the second thing is, in the same vein, it's very important to be able to articulate that value. So what are you bringing? And again, even if it's yes, meaning we have addressed a regulatory requirement, that has a value. Okay, when you don't comply with a regulatory requirement, meaning your ability just to stay in business can be challenged at some point. So, or it can become very expensive in terms of fines and all other sorts of I will say not very pleasant consequences. So, but stay to the close to your business and express the value of everything you do is quite important.
Excellent. Well, JC, I really appreciate the time today. This was really a masterclass on what it takes to be a successful chief data officer. Think about balancing the defensive moves, the offensive moves in the game. I'm happy to keep the analogy of soccer. I think that makes a ton of sense. Looping that through this idea of the single view of the customer is a perfect example of that, connecting to business value, not at the end, but at the beginning of these processes. And I really appreciate the perspective on AI and how that can be an important driver in the business, especially in financial services. So thank you so much for the time today, and all the best.
Thank you, Anthony. Same to you.
Thanks for joining us for the latest episode of the Data Masters podcast. You'll find links in the show notes to any resources mentioned on today's show. And if you're enjoying our podcast, please subscribe so you never miss an episode.